Okay, we're moving to the last chapter, chapter 17, and when we're looking at organizational processes, which involves managing organizational change and learning. In this particular chapter, we're going to look at a 7-step model of organizational change. We're going to look at sources of change and alternative change management approaches. We're going to discuss, again, ethical issues arising out of organizational development practices. We're going to compare alternative interventions that can help improve performance, and we're going to identify major reasons why people might resist organizational change. The way we want to approach this in an organization in managing change is from a proactive behavior. We want to make sure it's an ongoing process that people feel comfortable being engaged in. When we look at learning principles about change, one thing we need to do is we actually have to look at unfreezing old learning patterns. This comes usually in organizations that are large enough, or in human resource departments, they have people that help facilitate change processes of saying, what can we do to change old patterns and old learning styles? How can we move them to new learning? And how can we lock these into new learned behavior? A person who is involved in this is often called a change agent. They usually come out of an OD department or human resources. They're an intervener who actually brings different perspectives to the situation, and they tend to challenge the status quo. You might also have people like this emerging within teams and groups who start to see that things ought to be done differently in order to be more effective. The success of a change program rests heavily on the type of relationship the change agent and the key decision makers have, of whether they take them seriously. We have change agents that are internal to the organization. We have change agents that are external. These would be consultants and so forth. We have some change agents that are both internal and external and combine their efforts. One of the things that happen when we go about changing the learned behavior is people tend to resist change. Why do they do this? They have a rational or irrational reaction to the fact that change creates a lot of uncertainty. Some of it is actual, some of it is perceived, and some people may feel threatened in their jobs and in their relationships. Some people may have their own self-interest in mind, and it might be very scary for them. There might be a misunderstanding about the change. Some people in teams and groups might have a lack of trust to the organization if the climate hasn't been set up that way. There might be different perceptions and assessment about it, and some people just don't like change. They have a low tolerance for it. How do we help reduce this resistance to change in our organization? Employees' resistance to change can be reduced by having better education and communication. One of the things that has worked in many years that I have in consulting is when you involve all those that are involved in the change process, instead of just taking that a new system or a new procedure and throwing it down on the people, you actually have them involved in how to design and implement it. This goes back to our decision-making chapter. Also, we want to provide plenty of support. We don't just show up with a new computer system and say good luck. We negotiate and agree upon how things are going to be done, what kind of product we might be developing or service. We might even use, for lack of a better terminology, manipulation and a little co-option that might actually, ward off something negative that could happen. And we might have explicit or implicit sort of I don't know if coercion that they're using here is appropriate, but trying to manage behavior in a way that helps promote the change. The 7-step model that is talked about in your book has to do with focusing on the change, looking at the kind of performance outcomes that you're looking to move towards, how you diagnose problems that might impede that change, how you might select different types of interventions to help promote that change where you have the unfreezing of the learned behavior. You might have some kind of a feedback system that you use to make sure that you're on target. Then you have implementation where you actually implement the change based on timing. You might have different kinds of conditions that you look at in terms of who's going to lead, who's going to facilitate these kind of change. And built within all of this stuff is the feedback loop around the model for managing change. Some of the things within this model that we talked about has to do with some of the forces. Some of the things that start demanding a need for change in organizations is the economic environment changes for the organization. Maybe a product that has been a chief seller is now on a decline, and they need to look at how they can improve profits. There might be new technologies that are faster for how to develop a a system or a process or a product. And also some social political things might be changing. Just the whole thing like this move towards green organizations is changing how different organizations are perceived. We have internal forces that might be causing change, where we have different people in our organization. We might be downsizing. We might be having some behavioral problems that require us to restructure our organization. One of the key factors within our 7-step model is how do we diagnose a problem that's requiring us to have change. Change agents are really responsible for the facilitation of the diagnosis. They gather data, they interpret data, they present data. There's really no formula for accurate diagnosis. It just kind of happens within the context of the organization. Some questions that can help point you in the right direction are listed here, such as identifying what the problem is, what kind of changes need to be made to resolve the problem, some of the outcomes that, how would you measure it, and that would be very important in the part of diagnosing the problem. Some of the ways that you would collect data in diagnosing the problem would be a survey or a questionnaire among employees, among customers, just directly observing some of the process and techniques, interviews that you might have with key players, having workshops that would draw out information, and looking at secondary data such as documents and records. Then once we have diagnosed the problem and picked some alternatives and so forth based on the skills we picked up in our decision-making chapter, we would take a look at what kind of intervention is needed. What kind of specific action or program do we need to do to be able to implement a change on particular targets within our organization. Some of the depth of the intended change involves the scope and intensity of the organizational change efforts. It might be really minor or it might be really major. Some of these approaches might be structural in terms of changing departments or moving from a product organization to a geographical structural design. And you might be looking at changing behaviors by how we set up systems and processes in the organization. And we might actually be implementing some new technologies that might create some differences in the organization. Some change techniques would be structural changes, such as changing job designs, changing how departments are structured, changing relationships between line and staff. We might do some team building. We might have some cultural and diversity training. We might look at how we have new ways of using technology to transform our resources into different products and services. These technology changes that we might see happen that cause people a lot of stress too are using robotics, having wireless connectivity, automating, and using different type of manufacturing systems. What happens is sometimes if you worry about high-tech disappointments in organizational change, is oftentimes they bring in the technology but they don't change the structure of the organization, or they don't help change the behavior so people learn how to do this. This can be mitigated through using employee training, having different compensation packages that reward people for doing, for implementing this kind of change or for changing the management style. If you take a look, this chart just spells out a little bit more what you would do about structural changes, behavioral changes, and technological changes when you're looking at anticipation of some of the outcomes. Another method that is helpful in organizational change is something that is known as appreciative inquiry. And this is a new area within the past 10 years in organizations called positive psychology. And it's a method of bringing about change in a more positive way. And you use metaphors, narratives, so forth to help organization anticipate or initiate positive outcomes and to achieve their potential. It is based on letting go of a problem-based management of what we go around looking and identifying and criticizing everything that's wrong. And through the use of identifying things that work, we actually design new systems. It's a very creative engagement of ideas and solutions. This is the appreciative inquiry model, where you have 4 steps where you actually identify, you say, hey, what are the things that really work around here? What are the things that would make it even better? And what should we be doing to do that? And then what kind of goals and objectives do we need to move in that direction? And depending on the change agent or the innovation specialist, they'll ask these questions differently, but this is the basic 4-phase process. Some of the things that are causing organizational change to accelerate has to do with many organizations downsizing, moving towards a different style of management to empowering teams and people, to having more jobs be more virtual and distributed globally, and to also paying attention to the changing needs of our workforce that we talked about in the quality of work life around flex time. Some of the conditions that might limit our ability to promote change is the change technique that we actually select. And that might, that could be contingent on things about our leadership, how formal the organization is when we go back to organizational structure, how strong or weak our organizational culture is, and our assessment of the resistance to change among our employees and teams. One of the things we need to consider about implementing and evaluating change has to do with the timing and scope. When should we make this change, and how big should it be? And how should we solicit feedback from those that are involved to determine the success? How are we going to measure it? Again, we have ethical issues involved with change. Change itself isn't necessarily unethical, but when we start downsizing and laying people off, and how we go about doing that could be considered unethical. So unethical choices should always be guided by the values of management. And we should empower managers who create and foster a culture that encourages ethical behavior. Some of the guidelines for managing change is, that has shown to be very successful, is that the more involvement and commitment that you have from people in the organization, the more likely the change will occur. Advanced information lets people know what's going to happen to them. It takes out that uncertainty, and they know what they're being asked to do and when they're being asked to do it, and it doesn't make them feel as uncomfortable. The change effort should be connected to other parts of the organization, especially to a reward system. There's got to be some reason for people to change their behavior from something that's been comfortable and that they know works to something new that you're implementing. For a change to be effective, it must be based on a good diagnosis. It needs to come from the top level and be committed. It needs to involve everybody in the organization that's affected by it. People need to see the connection between that. And change agents are often employed that are competent and able to facilitate and overcome the resistance to change and help people welcome the new processes. One of the things that's very popular that's been coined by Peter Senge is a term called the learning organization. You might be working in one, or might say, hey, we're a learning organization. And how a learning organization is defined is that it's growing, not necessarily in size, but in people's development. They are constantly looking for how they can be more effective and more socially responsible, and how they can make their business values sustainable. A learning organization is constantly scanning the environment. They're constantly measuring performance. They have metrics. They constantly are educating their people. They're very transparent to how their management processes are implemented. They have multiple advocates around the organization for helping people learn and grow, and they engage all the leaders and serve as role models. Managers who also lead can create and contribute to the learning environment by building that learning commitment to people and being consistent in how they do this, and they can help work to generate ideas that have impact. The manager's role in a learning organization has to do with sustaining that commitment to learning and being consistent and being believable and not providing any kind of dissonance to the fact. There's some organizations that talk about learning and then really don't do it. They need to build cohesive teams. They need to help foster collaboration and support so that people feel that there's a positive movement going on. When you convert a traditional organization to a one that is considered more of a learning organization, you're going to have to change the way information is used and stored and reviewed so it's more accessible, so people can engage in learning processes. It can be more shared and available, be more transparent. And we need to actively work to make that information and idea sharing a creative part of the organizational life. So this concludes our course in organizational behavior. We have covered all different aspects of how organizational behavior contributes to making a high-performing environment. It's engaging individuals, teams, and organizational processes and structures and design to maximize the ultimate capability for people to work in a high-performing organization and to work from a place of feeling supportive, committed, and comfortable. So I hope you've learned a lot and that you enjoy your studies and integrate this with the rest of understanding your business education. Thank you very much.